There we go. All right, so before we do get started, as always, want to mention that this webinar is being brought to you by IP Video Talk. IP Video Talk is, for those of you not familiar with it, it's GrandStream's own in-house, it's our own, we developed it in-house here. It is basically one of the only web, video, and webinar platforms out there. It is one cloud-based conferencing collaboration platform that gives you the ability and the functionality to do web video conferences or web video meetings, room to room, from GrandStream GVC device to GrandStream GVC device video conferences, to mix those to have a web-based conference joined by physical in-room devices, or an in-room hosted meeting joined by web devices. We also have Android and iOS apps to join it from any Android or Apple device. And it also has full webinar functionality built into it. And one of the greatest things about it right now is you can get a variety of different plans for free. Just by going over to ipvideotalk.com, you can sign up for a free trial with no credit card information or anything like that. And then you can decide to go from there. So take a look at it. It is a really cool platform that we've had on the market for a little over a year now. It's called IP Video Talk. If you're not familiar with it, head on over to ipvideotalk.com to learn more and to sign up for a free trial. All right, so let's start with the introduction here into the UCM series of IP PBXs. I always kind of like to start this off by telling you a little bit of background about why we decided to make an on-premise IP PBX and to get into this industry 4 years ago. It came out in the summer of 2013, and here we are in the fall of 2017. In the 4 years that it's been out, it has truly become one of the most popular, award-winning on-premise IP PBXs in the world. The reason why we came out with these devices is that we saw, similar to what we saw with video conferencing and networking now, we saw that there was a huge gap in the marketplace, a huge opportunity for small to medium-sized businesses who were not previously being served by the PBX marketplace to put in place an enterprise-grade IP PBX that was easy for them to manage and packed in all of the high-end enterprise-grade features that they traditionally didn't have access to because they were priced in PBXs for, frankly, really large companies. So what we did is we took all of those enterprise-grade features, your high-end call routing, your support for voice, your support for video, data, and mobility, true unified communications manager, put it into a small, compact, easy-to-manage IP PBX with no licensing fees, as I'll get to later on. One of the best things about these devices is that they do not require any licensing fees at all at any point, even for upgrades. So the UCM 6100 series, which you see on the screen, was the first model in the UCM series. And last year, just about over a year ago, actually I believe just a year ago now, we kind of morphed the UCM 6100 series into the 6200 series. So the devices are basically the same. I'll show you on the next slide. There's a couple of extra features that the 6200s give you that the 6100s don't, but it's very, very minor. The backstory is actually that we had to switch the chip we were using in it, and so we had to give the product a whole different name, which is why the 6200 series came about. However, as I mentioned, same features, same functionality, same exact web user interface, same operating system, everything. These devices are built on the very popular and the very stable Asterisk platform that gives you the ability to, the very stable Asterisk platform, one of the most popular IP PBX platforms in the world, and we basically wrapped our own web user interface around that device. So that's what you see here on the screen. The UCM 6100 series and the UCM 6200 series, which have been out for just about 4 years now. Again, they're ideal for small to medium-sized businesses as they go up to either 500 or 800 users. Let me switch to the next slide, if it will let me. There we go. So once again, on the 6100 series and the 6200 series side, I'm going to introduce you to the 6510 next. Enterprise-grade features in an affordable, compact, easy-to-manage IP PBX specifically for the SMB marketplace for either 500 or 800 users for concurrent calls ranging anywhere from 30 up to 100 concurrent calls. Again, one of the best things about these devices, especially for end users, especially for you as a reseller, it makes it easier for your customers to start using this and to continue using it. So again, yes, no licensing fees, all hardware and software included for the one-time upfront purchase price. Basically, you purchase the device up front, all future upgrades, firmware, software upgrades are free, and as I'll tell you about at the end, we are constantly adding features and functionality to the UCM series interface through free firmware and software upgrades. We've done a variety of very comprehensive updates this year, which I'll tell you about just in a couple of moments. One of the other things I always like to mention about the UCM series of PBXs, just to point it out, and you see it from the logo that we have there, is these are not just voice servers. Traditionally, the PBX has kind of been seen as a voice server, a voice-only server. This is a true SIP Unified Communications Manager, which is where the UCM acronym comes from. Again, Unified Communications Manager has full support for full voice, video, data, and mobility solutions, not just voice solutions. So as I mentioned earlier, just like to throw this slide up. Just want to throw this slide up. I see some people in the chat are mentioning that they're having video issues. Everything seems to be okay from our end. Let me know. There is the option in the bottom left corner. We'll show you what your local connection is, and that could limit the video as well if you have a poor local connection. So it looks like hopefully it's just a couple of outlying situations there. But back to the content here. So the 6200 series, again, it was a continuation of the 6100 series, same features, same functionality. You see in blue there a couple of additional features that are available in the 6200 series, which again has been out for about a year now. One thing I want to mention here, because we always get this question, that every piece of new firmware we come out with for the 6200 is also available on the 6100 series. They use the exact same firmware version, so we will always support the 6100 series. Some of our distributors still have it available for purchase, and as you can see, it's pretty much exactly the same as the 6200 series. We will always support it. We will always continue to add new features and firmware to the 6100 series as well as the 6200 series. So the features that we've added in the 6200 series are pretty much just a built-in DHCP server in each model. Previously, only the 6102 offered that, and we also support switched dual network or router mode in every 6200 series, whereas only the 6102 supported that. We did enhance the 6208, the 8 FXO port version a little bit to be able to offer you a little bit more capacity than the other 6200 series or 6100 series models. So if you're looking for something that's in between our 61 or 6200 series, which you see here in the 6510, which I'm going to show you next, that 6208 is a great option. It gives you support for up to 800 users or devices, whereas previously only the, sorry, keep going back and forth between the chat and it's throwing me off here. Yeah, 800 users up to 100 concurrent calls, whereas the other 61 and 6200 series models go up to 60. So if you're looking for a little bit of an enhancement, a little bit more support than what you traditionally get from the 61 or 6200 series models, 6208 is what you want. All right, so let's transition over. I told you about the 6100 series, 6200 series. Now we have the 6510. The UCM 6510 is our high capacity, we'll call it enterprise level IP PBX. It packs the same, pretty much all of the same features. It actually adds a couple of additional features and functionality, like the option to use it with our new high availability controller, which I will tell you about in just a moment. Yeah, so again, same features, same functionality as the 61 and 6200 series, same web user interface. Again, the Asterisk platform that we've built our own web user interface around, and as I mentioned earlier, as you'll see in a moment, that web user interface has a completely new and fresh design that we're really excited about. So the main difference between the 6200 series, the 6100 series, and this UCM 6510 that you see here is what you see on the screen. These three things. It is the largest capacity UCM that we have, supports up to 2,000 users or 2,000 SIP extensions. It is the largest amount of concurrent calls that we offer, up to 200 concurrent calls. And it also gives you support for E1, T1, or J1 networks. So if you need higher capacity, or if you need to support E1, T1, or J1 networks, integrate those with a SIP network, for example, this is the device that you want. Let me go back to this slide here. Again, pretty much a lot of the same features, all of the same features, functionality, and a couple of small additional things, which I'll tell you about in a moment, from the 6510 to the other UCM series models. All of those high-level enterprise-grade features, again, with all of our UCM series devices, we give you access to every feature, every functionality we can possibly support on the UCM, all through free firmware and software upgrades that are always going to be free, so you just pay the one-time upfront purchase price with no licensing fees at any point, and you get a fully functional, unified communications manager. So one thing that you guys may have seen yesterday, I don't think I have a slide here for it, so I'm just going to talk about it real quickly. We just launched our first ever high availability controller, which has actually been really popular so far. I've honestly been a little surprised by how many questions we're getting about it and how popular the device seems to be. It's called our HA100. I will try to pop over to the website in just a second to show you that before we get into the technical training. It allows you to basically link two UCM 6510s together. That high availability controller is only for the UCM 6510. Gives you the ability to link two of them together, use one as the primary, one as the backup, and that HA100, that high availability controller, will automatically switch everything over to the other UCM 6510 in case the first one goes down or loses service connection for any reason. So check that out. That's the HA100. We officially launched it yesterday. It is available from your Grandstream distributors right now. And you can learn more about that by going over to our website. If you hover into the UCM series of IP PBX's section, you will see a page in there for the HA100. One of the things that I encourage everyone to pay attention to, and one of the things that I think is one of the stronger elements of our UCM series, is this zero config feature. Gives you the ability to basically auto-provision Grandstream devices in a couple of clicks. You can set up hundreds of them, frankly, very quickly. They will auto-populate on this screen, and then you can go through and either manually configure them or allow the device to go through what we call zero config, where it basically automatically configures each device either with a set of extension ranges that you provide or without it. This feature is supported only by Grandstream devices. The question there always becomes, do you support third-party SIP products? Absolutely we do. This is an open source SIP IP PBX. You can configure a provision, add any SIP device or service to it, integrate it with it. However, the zero config feature is optimized to work only with Grandstream products. So I've mentioned a couple of times all of the features, the feature upgrades that we have made available to the UCM this year. These are four of the main ones. There's actually a couple of big ones that aren't on here. But this is just to show you that the platform is constantly evolving and it's constantly getting stronger, and we're constantly adding more features and functionality to it. This year alone, we've added property management system integration. That is really popular and utilized widely by hotels. It gives you the ability to integrate, basically to use your communication network to help manage and keep track of hotel operations. Currently, we support H-Mobile and Mitel property management system software, with more to come. We also now integrate with customer relationship management software. CRM is what everybody knows it as. If your business or your customer's business uses Salesforce or Sugar CRM, integrate your Grandstream telephony or your Grandstream communication system with it, so that the two can share information when somebody calls into your UCM and feeds the information into your CRM, etc. We also have a CTI application that allows you to use our phones basically using a fully control Grandstream phones from a desktop application, a little widget that would load on your screen. We also now support WebRTC. which I know is a popular buzzword, not really super being utilized at the moment. The great thing there, what you can do is allow somebody to call right into your business or your client's business from an email, from a website, anything online, just by pressing a button from a WebRTC browser, and that call just from the browser will go right into your UCM system. A couple of questions. I'm going to hover real quickly over to the HA100 page before I turn it over to Abdel here to take you through the training. So you're going to see my computer screen pop up here for just a moment. So a couple of questions. So I just want to cover it real fast on the HA100. It is fully available. It is not a beta release. We actually released it for beta probably about 4 months ago. Went through quite a bit of beta testing, so it is a very stable product. You can find more information about it. Products here, go down to UCM Series IP PBX. There's a little graph that I want to show you while we're talking about it. And here it is, the HA100, again, launched yesterday, allows you to, as it'll tell you here, basically create an always-on redundant communication system by linking two UCM 6510s together through this HA100, which will automatically switch all system control to the hot standby secondary UCM 6510 if the initial one fails. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a zoom in on the ports there, got a variety of WAN, LAN ports, as well as FXO and FXS ports. That's on the front, and then over here on the back, also a variety of your RS-85, FXS, FXO, T1E1 ports, LAN, WAN, etc. And just let me bring up the data sheet here just to give you a good visual idea of kind of how this device is used. There we go. So on the back of the data sheet is this kind of little chart that shows you traditionally how it's used. You see there with the HA100 in the middle, you have a primary UCM 6510, secondary UCM 6510. You're going to have your FXS endpoints, analog phones, fax, etc. Going out through that, or excuse me, connected through the whole system, anchored by that HA100 to do automatic failover switching if needed. All right, so with that, looks like we wrapped up my introduction. Sorry, I went a little bit longer than I planned, which I seem to usually do with these introductions if you guys have been with us for other webinars. But anyway, so let's get into the technical part of the training. I'm going to turn it over to Abdel, our UCM guru from our North America support team, who will be taking you through the webinar. The technical training part of it. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them over to us through the chat or the new Q&A feature, which you're going to see at the bottom of your screen there. I'm just going to, as I talk, we're going to switch the control of the presentation over to Abdel. So just bear with us. You'll see the screen go blank here for a second. Yeah, so if you do have any questions during the technical part, feel free to type them over to us through the chat or the Q&A that you see down there on the bottom, which looks like a couple of people have already utilized, which is awesome. Basically, this will, sorry. Let's get this switched over, and then there we go. So there you see the new web user interface, and before I turn it over to Abdel, again, send over any questions you have. We'll do our best to keep up with the questions during the webinar. We will have a Q&A afterwards, and a lot of the questions you're going to ask, if you think we're ignoring you, it's just because we're going to answer them later on during the natural course of the webinar. So yeah, with that, I will turn it over to Abdel.
All right, Phil, thank you very much for the presentation, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar. For the second part of this webinar, I'm going to guide you through the web interface of the UCM and how to configure the UCM to meet certain requirements for your implementation. So the first thing, of course, you need to do is log into the UCM. You don't need any software or any plugins or anything. Just get the IP address of the UCM and just type it in. So once you type in the IP address, it's going to ask you, let me try that. By default, the GrandStream UCM, they come with admin password. Some of the latest UCMs, you might want to check in the back of your UCM to find the password for your unit. So once you log in, you will be presented with this dashboard where you can monitor the status of your UCM. especially the storage of your configuration, the data partition, and also to monitor the CPU and the memory usage. Monitoring the CPU is very, very useful. This is especially in case your UCM is under attack. You might see the CPU jumping all the way to 95% or 100%. So in case you see that the CPU jumps all the way to more than 90% and there is no activity on the UCM, that might indicate that the UCM is under some sort of attack.
Hey, quick question for you. Could you let us know what firmware version you're using here, or if you know it off the top of your head, which firmware version has the new UCM web design or web UI design, just because I'm sure some of the people out on the webinar,
absolutely,
this may be the first time they're seeing it.
Yeah, so I was going to mention this one. It's right here, and the system information. Of course, when you buy the UCM, always make sure that you have the latest firmware version. It's always available. Just go to the website firmware.grandstream.com, and then you can see what the latest version is, and you can just simply download it and upload it to the UCM. So for this webinar, I'm using a UCM 6202, and I'm running the latest firmware version, which is 1.0.14.24. This web interface, we started supporting this new interface since the last version, which was 1.0.14.23, which is a big change from the old interface.
Cool. Thanks.
So, yeah.
Sorry to throw you off.
No, it's all right. So next is the active call. This is where you monitor your active calls. You can hang up. You can actually barge into the call if you have the admin privilege. This is the network status, so you can see all the ports that are being used by the UCM. Next, we're going to jump to the configuration of the UCM. The first thing that you need to do, of course, when you want to configure the UCM or you want to deploy it, is create extensions. That's number one. So we're going to start with creating a few extensions. You have the option where you can add extensions. The UCM supports three types of extension. We have the SIP extension and we have the IEX extension, which is based on the asterisk signaling protocol, or the FXS. As you know, all the UCMs, they come with two FXS ports in case you want to use them to plug in some analog devices like fax machine or an analog phone or an analog paging device. You can also connect it to some other sorts of analog devices like intercom or speakers that support the RJ11. So most of the time you're going to be dealing with SIP extensions. That's, I'll tell you, 99% you're going to be dealing with SIP extensions. Then it's going to give you an option. You want to create a single extension or a batch of extension. Let's just go ahead and choose a batch. Then let's say I want to create 15 extension because that's what my client is requiring. Then you have the option to increment extensions by 1, by 2. It depends on your, it's a value depending on your preferences. Then you can choose the starting extension. By default, the UCM extensions, they start with 1000. You can always change them. If you want to use 3-digit extensions, you can always change them. And we're going to go through that. It's setting under PBX setting, I believe. And I'm going to show you how you can change the range of extensions that you can use on the UCM. Then you have some additional information related to the extension. For example, if you want to configure the caller ID specific to that extension, let's say you want that extension, when it makes outbound calls, you want it to send that caller ID. So just include the caller ID at the extension level. And of course, make sure you adjust the permission level depending on the outbound route. Because the permission level, you assign them to the extensions, and then you assign them to the outbound route. For example, if the extension has a privilege that is lower than the one that you assign to the outbound route, that specific extension is not going to be able to make outbound calls. So always make sure that the extension, if you want it to use certain outbound route, make sure that it has an equal or higher privilege than the one you assigned to the outbound route. And we're going to talk about that when we stop by the outbound route settings. So I'm just going to give it a national privilege. And the SIP password, By default, the UCM generates complex passwords. Some people, they go and they make some easy passwords like admin123. I strongly recommend to avoid that. Never ever try to use like easy to guess password. Always goes for something complex that has characters, numbers, alphabets, lowercase, uppercase. You can also enable voicemail or disable it. Then you can change the password or just keep the same password for the voicemail. So when users, they dial into the voicemail, they need to use that password so they can access their messages. Next, I'm going to move to media. These are the settings related to, as you notice right here, SIP settings. These messages, most of them, they affect how the packet, how the UCM generates the SIP message and send it to the other SIP endpoints. I'm going to talk about a few of them here. In case you have any questions about any setting, just make sure to ask the question, then I'll be glad to answer it by the end of this webinar. For example, the DTMF. DTMF mode, we support 3. The RFC 2833, we support the SIP info, and we support the inbound. When is there going to be, when are you going to be, for example, when you're going to need, for example, to change the DTMF mode is when sometimes you call into a system and then you press, let's say, for example, you call an auto attendant and you press 1 and you see that nothing happens. That could be related to a DTMF mismatch. If that's the case, just make sure that you go either to the SIP endpoint and change it to RFC 2833, or you can simply change it from here. Then there are all the codecs that we support. So these are the major codecs in the market. And as Phil mentioned earlier, you don't have to buy any licensing for these codecs. You can use any one of these. Just one thing about certain codecs that you need to be careful with, like the G729. If you want to use that one like in a conference call, it's not going to work for you. So that one works only with one point talking to the other, like A talking to B. That's when you can use G729. But if you want to use it for conference, it's just not going to work. If you have like a Grand C phones, I strongly recommend to go with the G722, which provides an HD quality. It's very, I mean, the type of audio that it provides for you is very clear and good. So, for example, if you notice right here, the primary codec that we choose is PCMU or G711 ULO. So we would like to make that on the top. Just select and click on the up arrow so we can make the G722 the top one. So that when that extension, when the SIP endpoint tries to talk to the UCM will always prioritize G722 as the codec. The next tab is features, and this is where you configure your unconditional call forwarding, your DND, your unavailable message. And one of the nicest features that we started supporting in the latest firmware version is the presence, which was not available in the previous versions. Now you can actually configure presence from the UCM, and you can assign it a name. For example, you can tell like in meeting. So every time when you are in meeting and someone is monitoring your extension, let's say with the presence monitoring button, you can, just by dialing the feature code, and we're going to go through that one later, just by dialing the feature code, the UCM is going to ask you which mode you would like to apply to the phone. And from these modes you have available, away, chat, or custom presence, or unavailable. So once you choose, for example, custom presence from the phone, it's going to show to the person that is monitoring your extension that you are in a meeting. This way they're not going to bother you by dialing your number. You can also specify DND. If you want to do it all time or just during specific time. You can also whitelist certain numbers from getting a busy tone when your phone is on DND. Let's say, for example, this is the extension of the secretary, and during lunchtime, she puts her phone on DND, but she want to add the extension, for example, of her boss. She can simply add the extension of the boss right there. She can add multiple extensions. You have a lot of options right there. The same thing applies to forwarding whitelist. So when you enable call forwarding on the phone, using the UCM feature code *72 and *73, you can actually whitelist. Let's say you want to forward all the calls, but there's that specific number that you want to receive, that you want to answer the call, which means you don't want to forward the call coming from that specific DID. You can actually just include it right there. And also you can include multiple numbers. There's also this option, the ring simultaneously. You can configure specific extension to ring simultaneously with an external number. Let's say you have your own extension in your office, but you move a lot and you want the UCM to call both your desk phone and your cell phone. You just need to simply include your cell phone number in there, and the UCM will automatically call both your extension and their cell phone number. And right here at the bottom you have certain settings. By default, like the ring timeout is 60 seconds. If you want to reduce it, just simply enter a low value, let's say like 30 seconds, so that the phone can ring 6 times before hitting the voicemail or hitting the busy tone. You can also include record, auto record, so every time this phone receives or makes a call, the UCM is going to record all the calls going to and coming from that specific extension. Phil also mentioned the WebRTC. In case you want to use that extension for WebRTC, just check this box. So after we create the extensions, okay, so now we have the extensions available. You have some other options. One of them is email notification. Let's say I created this extension, 1000, okay, and I have it set up with an email. Let's say this is Steve Dory, and his email, let's say it's abcxyz.com. Save and apply. For example, if the user Steve, he wants to use this extension on his GS Wave, the application, the GrandStream application on iOS or Android phones, just select the extension and just click on email notification, and the UCM is going to send an email with the QR code to Steve. So once Steve opens the email, he can just use the GS Wave application and scan the code so that he can have an account registered with the extension 1000. You can also import and export extensions from different UCMs. So after you do this, you have two options. You can go to the phone and configure them manually so that they can register to the UCM, or you can use the GrandStream auto provisioning feature, zero config. This is one of the best features in the UCM. The UCM automatically detects the GrandStream phones, and the zero config, by the way, it works only with the GrandStream devices, and it works only with the devices in the same network as the UCM. So you're not going to be able to detect devices from outside your network, because the zero config, the way it works is by using the layer 2 address, which is a MAC address, and layer 2 MAC address does not extend over the broadcast domain. So when you use the zero config, you have different options how you can provision the phones. As you notice right here, there's a global policy, there's global templates, model templates. So there are different ways. You can actually go to the phone itself and detect the phone, and then you can start provisioning that phone. Let's say I have a phone in my network with the IP, let's say 192.160, a phone with not 192.168.2. I don't know, 23. I can just click on OK, and the UCM is going to detect that phone. The UCM uses three options to detect phones, either using the ICMP message with the ping, or the ARP message, or the SIP info message. So the way it works, just put the IP or the last octet of the IP address of the SIP endpoint, and the UCM is going to detect it. So once the UCM detects that device, you can simply go directly to the device web page and start making all the configuration. Or you can, for example, if you have like 30 or 40 phones from the same model, you can actually create a model template for that specific model. Let's say we have 21, let's say we have 2130, so we're just going to call it template for 2130, and then we're going to call that one VLF because we want to configure VLF. Then you have two options. You can either set this VLF, this model template as active, or you can set it as default model template. So when you set it as default model template, anytime there is a phone that falls into the same model, which is 2130, and it boots up in your network, it's going to send a subscribe message to the UCM. It's a multicast IP, and the UCM is always listening on that specific multicast IP. So when it receives a message from a phone that is using the same model 2130, the UCM will automatically provision this model template to the phone without you touching anything. All you need to do is just reboot the phone, and the UCM will provision that specific phone. And then you have a lot of options that you can provision right here. You can change dial plan. All the phones, all the features that are available in the phones, you can actually push them from the zero config. Some of the features are not available in zero config. If you're looking for a setting, for example, that is not available in zero config, it's very simple. Just go to Grandstream website, go to support, tools, and then go to configuration template. So when you go to the configuration template, just look, it's going to give you all the templates for all the phones in the TXT format. Let's say I'm looking for 2130, which is, it should be somewhere here. Let's say I'm looking for 3275. You simply by knowing the feature that you want to provision to the phone, you can just go to the phone, get the name of the feature that you would like to provision to that specific phone from zero config. Just go to this document and just filter. Look for what feature are you looking for. Are you looking for auto answer? So just type in auto. It's going to give you the auto answer feature. So the value for auto answer is P2356 for account 1, P2456 for account 2, for account 3, 4. It depends. Each phone has its own P code. So you're simply going to take this P code right here. Let's say I want to provision this P code from the zero config. Just click on add a new field and just put the P code. For yes, you're just going to put 1. For no, just put 0. So this is how you provision the features or the settings that are available on the phones, but you can't find them in zero config. As I mentioned, just go to the website, download the TXT config file, and start provisioning the P codes for the feature. Let me go back to zero config here. So zero config, by the way, has a hierarchical design, which means if you have the same configuration, the same feature configured at the global policy level, global template, and the model template, and also the device configuration, which is this page, and they all have the same settings and they all conflict, and there is a hierarchical design. So the top one that overrides all the other settings is the device configuration. So everything that you configure at the device level is going to override the global policy, global template, and the model template. And the second in the hierarchy is the model template, and the third is the global template, and the fourth or the last one is the global policy. Here there is a model update. Sometimes when the Grandstream launches a new device, most likely you're not going to find it as a part of the model templates. If that's the case, just go to Model Updates and look for the device that you're looking for. And just go here and download it. This way, this device will be available under Model Templates. So now you have your phones provisioned and configured and registered. Let's assume they're all registered to the UCM. The next thing you want to do is configure the call features, which means that you want to configure call conferences, IVRs, ring groups, paging groups, call queues. So we're going to go through them quickly. The UCM, of course, supports the conference. You can create a conference room. You can have, for example, this 6202, you can have up to 3 conference bridges running at the same time. And the maximum number of participants that the UCM supports for the call conference is 25 participants. So let's say I'm going to create a conference bridge, and I'm going to assign it extension 6300. You have 2 options. You can make it a public mode, which means anyone who does that extension can merge into the conference bridge, or you can make it private. So when you make it private, you just need to click on Wait for Admin. Then the users, for example, you want to assign them the PIN number 2017, and you are the admin, you want to give yourself the PIN number 2018. Then you have a lot of options here at the bottom. Quiet mode, because the UCM, every time you call into the conference, it's going to ask you to say your name. So once you say your name and you join the conference, it's going to say, Steve, join your name using your voice. If you want to use quiet mode, you can just check that box. And you have a lot of options here. You just need to go through them. If you use the user manual, it explains all of them. For example, if you want to record the conference, if you want to play music on hold, you can actually customize it. You can upload your own music on hold. So while people are waiting for the admin to join the conference, they're going to be listening to that specific music on hold. So let's save and apply. Then you have the option where you can actually schedule a conference. You can tell the UCM, for example, let's say this is the sales meeting, and they do the sales meeting, let's say, every Tuesday or every Wednesday at 10:20, or you can change the time. It's up to you. You have a lot of options right there. Just select the time. Let's say it's 11. Okay. Do you want to repeat that one every week, like every Wednesday? Just check weekly. What happens when you configure it this way, the UCM, every Wednesday at 11 is going to call all the extensions that you select under the extensions right here. Where is it? Local extensions. For example, these are the salespeople, 1000, 1002, 1003, 1004. So these are the salespeople. So every Wednesday, the UCM is going to call these extensions to join the conference automatically. You can actually sync the conference schedule with your Google Calendar by checking this box. There's a setting at the bottom that you need to configure for that option to work. And just save and apply. Next, the IVR, or what some people they call auto attendant. You can create an auto attendant, give it a name, give it an extension, and you can upload your own prompt so that when people call into the auto attendant, they can hear either music, or you can record your own greeting message. For example, if you have someone with a nice voice and you want to record your own greeting, just click on prompt, then it's going to take you to another page. Then you have the option to record or upload the custom prompts. For example, if you want to record your own greeting, just assign it a name. Let's say this is the main greeting. And then you choose the extension. So once you choose the extension and click on record, the UCM is going to call that extension that you choose so you can start recording your message. Once you're done, you just hang up. So when you hang up, the recording is going to show up right here. So when you go back to the IVR, under under the prompt, it's going to show up also here. It's going to populate under this, the default one, which is the welcome. Then just choose that one, apply it, and you can also configure the key press and events for like press 0, let's say press 0 to call extension 1000, press 1 to call extension, let's say 1002, and so on. You can actually include an IVR inside another IVR. In case, for example, you have a system with different languages, you call the main IVR. The main IVR is going to tell you press 1 for French, press 2 for Spanish, press 3 for English. You can actually include an IVR inside an IVR. And you can go up to 5 levels, which means one inside another one like 5 times. That's the max that the UCM can support efficiently. Next, you can also configure ring group in case you have a group of extensions that you would like them to ring simultaneously or in order. You just give it a name. You just call it, for example, a ring group. And then you can start choosing the extension that you want them to be part of that ring group. Just select the extensions, then move them to the selected area. If you have 2 UCMs, for example, connected with a SIP, like a peer SIP connection or peer-to-peer connection, if you enable the LDAP sync at the trunk level, all the extensions are going to populate right here. So you can choose actually extensions from another UCM, and you can just include them to be part of the same ring group. The UCM also supports the paging and intercom. You can create a group. Let's say this is the warehouse, and you want to page all the employees in the warehouse, and you want to give it extension 6200. You have 2 options. You can create intercom or paging. Intercom basically is 2-way, and paging is 1-way audio, which means only you can speak, but you can't hear what they said. So if you want to have the 2-way audio, just make sure you choose the intercom. And then you can choose the extensions that you want them to be part of that paging group. Select. So if you would like to page all these extensions, just dial extension 6200. And the UCM is going to page these phones, and these phones, they're going to auto answer, and they're going to start playing the audio from the speaker of the phone. You can also use call queue. And the latest version actually included a lot of enhancements to the call queue that was previously available in the old versions. So let's talk quickly about these settings. So let's say you want to create a call queue. You can give it an extension, give it a name. Let's say this is the main queue. You have strategy. It gives you a lot of options. You want to ring all the phones at the same time, or you want to ring them in linear fashion, or least recent, or fewer calls, or random. So you have a lot of options that you can choose from. So let's say we're going to use linear. You can upload your own music on hold actually to the call queue, so that while people are waiting on the phone, they would be probably listening to music on hold, or if you want to promote some products, you can actually do the music on hold. The maximum length by default is 0. That means the UCM, depending on your SIP trunk or analog trunk, it's going to accept as many callers as possible. If you want to limit that, for example, to 5 callers, you can just choose the number 5, and then you have some other options here. Under advanced settings, these are the enhancements that were included in the call queue. Now we support the virtual queue, which is a very, very nice feature. So the virtual queue, basically, this is what it does. When someone calls into the call queue, and instead of waiting for too long, you can give them the option. You can configure the UCM, for example, to tell the caller just by pressing 2, so that they can leave their contact or their callback number. So when there is an agent that is available from the call queue, the UCM is going to automatically call that person and call the agent to initiate the call. So this is a nice way for callers, when they call into the UCM, to keep their spot in the call queue. And then you have a lot of options like the fax machine. In case you want to use the UCM to receive your faxes, you can actually do that. You can create a fax extension, let's say 7200, and we're going to give it a name as main fax, and then the email address is going to be abc, for example, xyz.com. So this is what happens when you have a fax line and you don't have a fax machine. You can actually use the UCM for that purpose. The UCM, when you configure the fax extension as a default destination for incoming faxes, the UCM is going to receive the fax and then converts it to a PDF file and send it to your email that you enter right here. So you're going to receive the fax as an email attachment or as a PDF file in an email attachment. So this is a very nice one in case you want to use fax but you don't have a fax machine in your environment. Next, we're going to go back to call routing. After you create the extensions, you have your ring groups, and then you have your IVRs, call queue, and all that stuff configured. The next thing is you want to create your trunks. If you're going to be using POTS line, you definitely want to go to analog trunks and choose. If you have two POTS line coming in, make sure you choose 1 and 2. And then just save. For the analog trunk, you don't have to do much. So let's call that one main. But one thing that you should definitely do when you create the analog trunk, always make sure you run the detect tool. Because analog lines, they have different parameters. Some analog lines are longer than the others. Some POTS lines, they use different threshold, different analog parameters. So you want the UCM to detect those parameters. Usually I use the semi-auto detect because it's more reliable. So I choose the channel. Let's say I want to detect line, and then you just need to put your cell phone number. Click on detect. The UCM is going to call your cell phone number. Then there are like 3 or 4 steps that you need to follow. Just click OK. The UCM is going to tell you what to do. Usually this process takes about like a minute or 2 to complete. And it's very helpful so you can avoid issues with the audio lines. In case you want to use SIP trunks, you want to go to VoIP trunks and then create a SIP trunk. You have 2 options, peer SIP trunk or register SIP trunk. The peer SIP trunk, some carriers, they just need your public IP so you can register to their SIP server. But most carriers, they use the register SIP trunk, which means they're going to give you a username and password so that the UCM can register to their SIP server. So let's say, assume we have a SIP trunk with SIP.com. Let's call this one SIP trunk. And then the company is SIPtrunk.com. So this is the carrier. Just put the carrier, the domain name. If they're using a different port other than 5060, you can actually include it next to the domain name. Then you have some other options. Keep original caller ID. This is when you need to check that one. For example, when the call hits the UCM and the UCM forwards the call to your cell phone, by default, you're going to see the caller ID of the UCM. If you want to keep the original caller ID, which means the person that called into the UCM in the first place, make sure you check that one. Then the UCM, when it forwards the call to you, it's going to keep the same original caller ID. You remember we talked about configuring the caller ID at the extension level. You have this option which is keep trunk caller ID. So when you have that option enabled, the caller ID associated with the trunk is going to override the extension. So if you have multiple DIDs and you have the extensions configured with these caller IDs, make sure you uncheck this one. If you want to use the caller ID associated with the trunk, check that one. And this is where you put the username. Let's say this is the username that the carrier provided for you, then just enter the password and save. So when you create the when you create the SIP trunk, you want to create, of course, the outbound and inbound routes so that the calls can go out of the UCM and come into the UCM. So let's first start with the outbound route. So I'm going to create an outbound route. I'm just going to call it, this is for like national numbers. The pattern, there are many ways how you can configure the patterns at the outbound level. If you hover over the tooltip, it's going to show you all the characters that are supported under the DID pattern for the outbound route. If you use X dot, that means the UCM is going to send or will allow any number. X stands for a number and dot any range of number, which means you can dial any number. I do not recommend this. I usually recommend like using explicitly defined dial patterns. For example, if you're in North America, you just want to use the NAMP pattern, which is 10 digits, or you can also add multiple patterns in the same outbound route. For example, the first one is 10 digits, so we want to create another one with 11 digits, so we're just going to do the same thing. If you would like to allow 911 calls, you can just simply enter 911. I mean, it gives you the option to include a lot of patterns inside the same outbound routes. And you remember when we were talking about the permission level at the extension, so we assigned it national, so we want these extensions to be able to call from this outbound route. Just give it the same extension. I'm sorry, I mean give it the same permission. Let's say you want to create, for example, this outbound route for international. And international USA, for example, the numbers, they start with 00. They start with 011 and then X dot. That's in the United States. In other countries, they use 00 plus the country code. Let's say you have this outbound route for international calls, and you only want the owner of the company to be able to use this outbound route. So you have a lot of options. You can either use the pin group, which you can create when you click on outbound routes. You're going to see pin group, where you can create multiple pin groups, so that every time someone uses this outbound route, the UCM is going to tell you under the CDR which one of the users actually made this call. Or you can use the password. Just include the password in there and give it to all the users, like 3 or 4 users, so all of them, they're going to use the same password. The pin group is more granular than the password, so you have to choose either one. You can't use both of them, so only one of them can be chosen. The other option that you can use actually is enable filter on source caller ID. You can actually, for example, create this outbound route, okay, and choose only extension, for example, 1000. So when you configure it this way, only extension 1000 will be able to use this outbound route to make international calls. And then you choose the SIP trunk. Let's say we're going to use the SIP trunk to make this international call. Then you have some options here like strip and prepend. This is useful. I'll give you this example. Let's say you don't have this pattern. So now we're going to use the local numbers. Local numbers, usually they are only 7 digits. So your client, for example, is moving from analog system to an IP PBX. Of course, when you use a SIP trunk, the SIP trunk does not recognize 7 digits. Most carriers, they don't accept 7 digits. You need to have at least 10 digits to make calls through the SIP trunk. So you users, they still want to have the convenience to dial 7 digits. It's fine. Just include 7 digits in there, choose the trunk, and tell the UCM, for example, I'm in Boston. The area code is 617. I can tell the UCM every time someone dials 7 digits, prepend 617 and send it as a 10 digits. Or I can tell it prepend 1617 and send it as 11 digits. So this is for outbound route. Next is the inbound route. This is for incoming calls. The same thing, I mean the same characters that we use under the outbound routes, you can use them also under the inbound routes. Let's say this is your DID, which means this is your main number. You can actually include it like that. or you can simply include X dot. Sometimes you have one trunk with multiple DIDs. That's when you need to specify which number, which means you're going to create one inbound route for that specific number, then create another inbound route, and configure the default destination. Let's say this is the main number, and I want to send it to the auto attendant so that people can call into the auto attendant, and from there they can choose whether to call extension or ring group, or, I mean, depending on what options you have under the IVR. Just choose it that way. Then you have the option where you can actually prepend the trunk name or define the trunk name. So that when someone calls into this inbound route, the UCM actually is going to include the original caller ID and the caller ID of the extension that is ringing, and you can also add another information. It could be a number or a caller ID name or string. It's up to you. You have this option. So if you want to tell the users, for example, this call is coming from this specific inbound, you can actually just include the number in there. And the users, they would know that this call actually is coming for that specific number. Next, we're almost there. Under the general settings, as I told you at the beginning of this webinar, the UCM by default chooses extension 1000. You can actually change it from here. If you want to use 100, you can include 100. Just make sure that they're not conflicting with other extensions. If you notice, the message that I'm getting here conflicts with call park, because the call park, they use 700. So make sure that when you create those extensions, you don't have any extensions that are conflicting with each other. SIP settings. These are the settings that actually changes how the packet is generated by the UCM. This is the general one. For example, the port that the phones they use by default to reach the UCM is 5060. Well, if you want to add more security, you can actually change it to 5080. But when you change this on the UCM, make sure that the phones are aware that the UCM, for example, is using 5080. The way you do this, if you're using zero config, it's fine. The UCM is going to push its port numbers, so you don't have to do anything. But if you are configuring the phones manually, you need to add this port 5080 to the IP address on the UCM. And here you have TCP or TLS in case you want to use TLS for encrypting the signaling messages. And the net. This is very important. I mean, the net setting when it's important in case you have like one-way audio, in case you have like remote extensions that are registered to the UCM, and when they call out, they get like one-way audio. It could be related to the net setting that is not properly configured. If that's the case, all you need to do is get the public IP address behind which the UCM is located and just include it in that box. And then you can actually change the port number. If you notice that people are hacking into your system and they're using port 5060, you can actually change it to a different port. And then at the bottom, you can include your network subnet. So that every time someone calls through the UCM from behind the subnet, the UCM is going to send this public IP. And then you have some options here for TOS. Settings related, for example, to RTP timeout. Sometimes if you notice that when you put the call on hold, and after like a minute and a half or a minute and 40 seconds, the call drops, it could be related to that setting. Probably you need to increase it or just leave it blank so that it does not apply. The RTP settings, by default, the UCM for RTP is using the port range from 10,000 to 20,000. You can actually increase that, reduce that range, for example, to 10,000 to 12,000. 2,000 ports, I think, is more than enough. If you would like to customize your music on hold, you can create a new music on hold class and you can upload your own music, and then you can assign it to different extensions, assign it to the car queue or a ring group, or different options how you can assign the music on hold. And before I finish this, let me just go through some security settings, because that's very important to secure your UCM, especially if your UCM is using a public IP or if you're using a DDNS. It's very important to secure your UCM. So we're just going to go through them quickly. Of course, the first one, you definitely need to change the password that comes with the UCM, the default one. So the default one, of course, is admin. You definitely want to change that one to something long and complex. At least use 12 characters with uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers, so that when hackers, they try to log into your UCM, or they're trying to use some kind of brute force attack on the UCM, it's not going to be easy for them to hack into your system. You can also configure the login settings, so you can tell the UCM, for example, if someone tries to log in 3 times within, for example, let's say, for example, 600, which is 10 minutes, block them for 10 minutes. Or if you choose, for example, the value 0, you tell the UCM, if someone tries to log into the UCM 3 times, block them permanently. And when the UCM blocks that specific IP address, it's going to show up right here under the login banned user list. You can actually include your whitelist. In case you always log into the UCM remotely, you can actually add your public IP to the whitelist so that the UCM does not apply this rule against your public IP address. The UCM by default, if there's no activity, it's going to log you out or kick you out after 10 minutes. You can increase that one to an hour, which I don't recommend, or you can just leave it at 5 minutes, which means do the stuff that you need to do and log out. The UCM by default has an option which I recommend to disable, which is redirect from port 80. And you notice that every time you try to log in into the UCM, you just type in the IP, and then the UCM will add the port 8089 and redirect you to HTTPS. For that purpose, I recommend disable that option and change the port of the UCM, the HTTPS port, from 8089 to a different port. You can choose a port, any port that is not being used in your environment. I don't know, you can use 6069, for example, if it's not being used. Then save and apply changes. That's a very, very important. I strongly recommend to disable that one and change the port so you can add more security to the access of the UCM. And we talked about that one, the SIP extensions, of course, always remember, assign them long extensions, strong passwords, not an easy to guess password. There's another option here under the under the media. Sometimes you assign extensions to users, and then those users are smart enough to know the password, for example, associated with that specific extension. So they're going to take the same settings, take it to a different phone at home, for example, register their phone and start making calls, and this way it's going to be very hard for you to track those phones. One nice option that the UCM has is a strategy. For example, if your users are all in the same subnet, you can tell the UCM only accept SIP registration from this local subnet. So even when someone so for example, yeah, it's a subnet right there, yeah. So when someone, for example, tries to register to the UCM, to any extension, even if they have the correct password for the extension, they're not going to be able to register because the UCM is restricting registration to that specific extension to only messages coming from the local subnet. If you have your phones, for example, configured with specific, like static private IP or static public IP, just include it right there. So that when the UCM, for example, receives, I have to choose here specific. So when the UCM receives SIP registration, if it's not coming from that specific IP, it's not going to accept it even if it has the right credentials. So it's very important to use that feature also. There is another option here under the IVR, and I'm not sure if I talked about it. So when you create the IVR and you make it to your main IVR, make sure you don't check that one unless you have call routing configured with security. Because when you check the dial trunk at the IVR, that means when people call into your business and they hit the IVR, they will have the option to call other numbers. So if you have that one and you have international calls allowed at the outbound routes, people will be able to call and make international calls from your UCM, and you don't want that. So make sure you don't enable this one unless you have the outbound security enabled with a password or with a privilege level, or you have some sort of password, the stuff that we talked about earlier. There's also an option here, I believe it's under, no, it's PBX settings, SIP settings. Oh no, it's under general. This option right here, make sure you never enable that one. Because if you have that one enabled, the UCM is not going to authenticate incoming invites. So you definitely want the UCM to authenticate anyone who's calling into UCM or calling out of the UCM. So make sure you don't check that option. And then one of the other settings that are very useful in the UCM to protect under SIP attacks is the firewall settings, or under security settings, all right, security settings. This option is called fail to ban. So basically that one is disabled by default, and I strongly recommend to enable that one. For example, when someone tries to register or make calls out of the UCM 3 times and they don't provide the right authentication, for example 3 times within 10 minutes, the UCM can block them. For example, you can use the max amount of time. It's going to block them for that specific time, and this is very useful against, for example, SIP attacks. People who try to register their SIP devices to the UCM, even if in unauthorized way, which means they're not allowed to register, but they just keep trying like a brute force with SIP registration. So when you enable the fail to ban, make sure you check that one, the asterisk service, and also you can use the login attack defense, and you can, for example, use the value 3. If they try to log into the UCM 3 times and they fail, the UCM is going to blacklist them or ban them for that specific time. So these are the major security things that I recommend to implement on your UCM. And finally, I'm just going to go through some settings right here so we can talk about them quickly. And one of them is OpenVPN. The UCM for confidentiality or privacy, you can actually use an OpenVPN. If you have a router or server that supports OpenVPN, you can actually use the UCM with OpenVPN. This is very useful in case you have remote extensions and you want them to register to the UCM and your router supports OpenVPN. You can actually create OpenVPN certificates for your remote phone and the UCM so that all the communication is going to be encrypted using OpenVPN. So I tried to cover most of the settings on the UCM. Of course, there are a lot of things that we haven't covered because of we don't have enough time to go through all of them. But if you have any questions related to any setting, just feel free to ask the question and we'll be glad to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, Abdel. Great content as always. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over. Looking through some of the questions that we have here. Looks like a lot of the stuff probably got answered during. So this is probably a good question regarding the HA100, which we talked about a little bit earlier, specifically with the UCM 6510.
Can we have our UCMs in different data centers using HA? I mean, the way the HA works is that it's going to become your point of contact. And the two UCMs I use for failover, they're going to be located behind the HA. So it doesn't matter where you have the UCMs located. What matters is these UCMs, they need to be connected to the HA100. And the HA100 is going to become like your point of contact of your SIP devices. Let me go back to that question again.
Yeah, I'm looking for it, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, so you can only, as I told you, the HA is going to become your point of contact for the two UCMs, so it doesn't matter where the other UCMs are located as long as they are properly connected to the HA device.
Cool. And then a follow-up to that is on that HA100, the two UCMs would sync automatically?
Yes, that is correct. So I think I can show it to you from here. So because the HA, as Phil mentioned earlier, it works only with UCM 6500. Because the 6500, they have the ports, the heartbeat port. Let me see if I can log in. Did I touch something? Anyway, there is an option under the UCM 6500. It's called HA. I think it's available under PBX or system settings. Just go to the UCM and enable that one. And the way I recommend to use the HA, use the master UCM like the 6500 and do all the configuration that you need on that UCM. And then plug the UCM to the HA using the proper connections, using the cables and the USB to RS485 and all those connections. Once you plug it into, you connect all the three devices together, the HA is going to sync the data automatically. For example, if the master UCM for some reason goes down, the HA is going to change automatically. It's going to take probably between 7 to 12 seconds to change all the information to the slave. So the time it takes to sync information is very, very low. It's like under a minute to change that information between the two. So the slave UCM, you don't even have to touch it because the HA device is going to sync all the configuration between the two UCMs.
All right, this question's from earlier, so you may have answered it, but how can we change the default prompt message on the UCM?
Which prompt message?
Good question.
We're talking about if you want to change, for example, the prompt, the one that we talked about, the auto attendant, you can definitely go and you can start recording your own prompt. If you are talking about the default prompt, which means when you call into the
voicemail, for example.
Exactly, it tells you extension 1002 is unavailable, you can actually change them. There is a document here, I think, under PBX. Let me show you exactly.
And one thing that he mentioned is it says welcome to the comedian mail. And that is, I believe, the name of Asterisk voicemail platform. So that's what that means.
Yeah. So if you want to change the asterisk prompts, let me just find. I'm going to show you the document that you can use for that one because there's a lot of configuration that you need to do. It's not one step that you need to do. Let me find that document for you. Yeah, right here. So you're just going to go to the GrandStream website and then go to the UCM, the documentation of the UCM, then click on this document. It says UCM Voice Prompt Guide. It's going to give you the tool. It's going to give you also the instructions how you can change these prompts on the UCM.
Cool. A little bit of a longer question, so I'll read it out loud here. Right there. Is there any feature code to activate unconditional call forwarding on one VoIP trunk, not just on an extension, but on the whole trunk? For example, all incoming calls to that trunk would be forwarded to an external number.
For that feature, we don't have that one, honestly. You can only do it at the extension level, but this is like the workaround that you can probably use. So when you go to the inbound route, you have that option where you can set global inbound mode. If you use only one trunk, that's good. So just make sure you enable that one, then these are the feature codes that you need to use. And the way it works, when you have that one enabled, and then you go to the inbound routes, you can actually, this is like, for example, the default mode, which means the call is always going to go to the IVR. Click on inbound, multiple mode, then go to mode 1, and then you can use, for example, external number. And then you can include your cell phone number, for example. So the default mode is going to be the main one, which means all the time the calls are going to go to the default mode, the IVR. If you want to leave your office and you want the calls to go to your cell phone number, just by using the feature code *61, the calls are going to switch to your cell phone instead of the IVR. So if you want to switch it back, just use the feature code *62.
Awesome. Last question that we have, so if you do have any, it's a longer one too, so I'll read it out loud. If you do have any final questions, shoot them over. Actually, there's one other one in the Q&A that I'll mention after this. So, question is, we need to monitor the inbound route mode status. If it, for example, if it is on default mode or mode 1, need to visually see on the phone if it is in mode 1, or if mode 1 is enabled or not. Is there any way to achieve that?
I mean, that's going to be a very useful feature, but at the moment it's not supported. We have submitted a feature request for that one for our dev team to include that one in the future. So just keep an eye. Probably it's going to be included in one of the future release firmware releases, so you can monitor actually which mode are you using with the default or mode 1.
Cool. All right, looks like this is going to be our last question here. More of a general one, but can you show us how to back up and upgrade firmware, or where the field within the
yeah, absolutely,
where that is done?
Yeah. So the first thing, of course, you want to do is the backup. Yeah, absolutely. Before any upgrade, you want to do the backup. So you're going to go to maintenance. Then there is a backup option right here. The UCM gives you 3 options. You can back up this configuration on the internal storage of the UCM, and you don't want to do that because if something happens to the UCM, you want to have a backup stored somewhere. The UCM supports an SD card or USB drive. So just plug it into the UCM, and once you click on Create Backup, it's going to show up here because I don't have any USB drive, so it's just showing me the local storage. So once you have the USB or SD card, it's going to give you the option to choose which one you want to use for backup. Then on the top, you have the options. You want to restore the data information or the configuration information. If you want to include both of them, just make sure you choose all. Then you can back up the whole configuration, including all the data information like voicemails, recordings, and CDR, and then have that file recorded in your external drive. So after you do that, you just need to go to upgrade. For example, if there is a new release and you want to upgrade it to the UCM, just go to the GrandStream website. Okay, go to support, firmware. It looks like I'm having some problems. Yeah, oh, it's back. Good. So then you just click on, for example, the official one is 1.0.14.24. If you want to use that one, just click on this. Then it's going to give you the firmware file. For example, if one is the beta version, you want to test it or something, just click on that version, then select the file, and it's going to be downloaded to your system. So once it's downloaded into your PC, make sure you unzip it, because all the files, when you download them, they are in a zipped format. Unzip it to get the bin file. So once you get the bin file, just click on Choose File to upload, and look for the binary file. Select, Open, and then start the upgrade. The upgrade usually takes 5 minutes. You're going to see upgrade after probably 4 to 5 minutes. It's going to tell you, for example, reboot. Click on reboot, then that's it. It's a very quick process of 5 minutes to do the whole thing.
Awesome. Got 2 final questions that came in that should be easy to answer, or quick ones, so we'll do that. This one down here. How do we allow the receptionist, or can we allow the receptionist to answer a call first instead of sending it to the IVR?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, choosing the IVR as a default destination is just an option. For example, let's go back to the inbound route. And this is our main number. I choose IVR. If you want to send, for example, the call to the receptionist, just choose extension and then select her extension. This way, the call is going to go to her extension, which is 1002. If you want to enable call forwarding when she's not available or when she's busy, you can do that. You can go to the configuration of extension 1002, and then you can choose, for example, the extension of the IVR, which means if she doesn't answer, the call is going to go to the IVR where people, they can choose to call other extensions.
All right. And the very last question for today, before we sign off, down here. Basically, our voicemail system asks you to enter the extension number first when you call into it. Is it possible to eliminate that and only ask for a PIN number?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the UCM actually uses 2 feature codes. Let me go to the feature codes right here. If you notice right here, the star 98, this one is to access voicemail in general, which means you access the voicemail, then it's going to ask you for your extension number. If you would like to access, for example, the voicemail of the extension you're calling from, just dial star 97 instead of star 98, then it's going to tell you enter your PIN number without the prompt to enter the extension number.
There you go. Easy answer. All right. That looks like that wraps up our webinar for today. We want to thank everybody for being with us. Sorry for the little bit of a delay in getting going. But as always, we appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to learn a little bit more about GrandStream Solutions. No, it's not only the end of the month, but probably for a lot of you, it's the end of your quarter as well. So we appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule to learn a little bit more about GrandStream Solutions and our UCM here today. This webinar was recorded. I will post it probably tomorrow on our YouTube page. So you can just check our YouTube page tomorrow or the day after for a full video and audio recording of this training webinar. Also on our YouTube page, you can find a variety of other recent training webinar recordings. For example, we did a GWN Wi-Fi access point training last week that was recorded and will be posted up there. There are a variety of other GWN recordings, previous UCM recordings. I believe we have a GDS, which is our Facility Access Solution training webinar recording up there as well. So that is youtube.com/GrandStream Networks, which is where you can find all training webinars. And if you check back in a day or two, today's will be up there. All right, so again, I want to thank everybody for being with us. We hope to see you again soon at another GrandStream webinar, and we hope you have a great day. Take care.